Do you think that a high-fat diet could actually fix the heart?
Yes. I don't see how saturated fat, I don't see how butter can raise LDL cholesterol. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, don't have a cholesterol test in March.
Dr. Zoe Harcombe is a world-leading nutrition expert who's on a mission to expose the truth about cholesterol and saturated fat.
And why statins are destroying your brain and your body.
When you actually understand what cholesterol is, it is one of the most vital substances in the human body. You have no life, you have no cell form without cholesterol. It is that vital to the human body, and that is not up for debate. So the chemical formula for cholesterol is C27H46O. So again, if your doctor says to you, oh, your good cholesterol is this and your bad cholesterol is that, I'd just be so tempted to say, please can you tell me the chemical formula for good cholesterol? And then tell me the chemical formula for bad cholesterol. Make them realise the insanity of what they're saying to you. I also personally do not think that lowering cholesterol with statins is a good idea. And I've seen extreme cases of debilitation of people being on these drugs. Dwayne Graveline wrote a brilliant book, Lipitor, Thief of Memory. He was an astronaut. He was put on statins by his doctor. He couldn't remember where he'd left his car in the car park. Came off statins, everything went back okay, was persuaded to go back on them, the same thing happened. And if you are one of the people who will benefit, and most won't, you might get 3 or 4 days in 5 years. Almost everyone would throw their statins away.
When we talk about a high-fat diet, people think lots of butter, a stick of butter. Why is that maybe not a good idea?
I mean, that's a problem for a number of reasons.
This episode with Dr. Zoe Harcombe was about a topic I've never discussed on this podcast, the link between LDL, cholesterol, and saturated fat. Now, most likely your doctor will tell you, lower your LDL, lower your total cholesterol. But by the end of the episode, you'll understand why doing this will actually increase the risk of you getting a heart attack and heart disease. But the mainstream will not tell you this. So if you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please hit the subscribe button, because 81% of you who watch these episodes regularly have not subscribed. And by the simple act of subscribing, you can help share this message to millions more people that need to hear the truth. And now for the episode with Dr. Zoe Harcombe. Dr. Harcombe, welcome.
Thank you.
When many people add more fat to their diet, especially saturated fat, one big change can happen. Their cholesterol and their LDL can skyrocket, and sometimes their triglycerides. And most likely your doctor will look at that and say, if you continue eating this way, you're going to get a heart attack. And that's exactly what my doctor said to me 4 years ago. So in this episode, Dr. Zoe Harcombe is going to share her decades of research and experience and talk about the truth about cholesterol, saturated fat, and LDL, and if they are in fact evil. But most importantly, why you shouldn't add a stick of butter or extra fat to your meals every single day. So Dr. Harcombe, my first question. I want to talk about this link between high cholesterol and heart disease. Does high cholesterol in any way destroy the heart?
Crikey, no. And we've got to come back to something you said in the introduction, actually, because I don't know how saturated fat can raise LDL cholesterol, let alone that it does. I do not know of a mechanism by which that happens. So we've got to come back to that. Does cholesterol cause heart disease? So I looked at this in 2010. I had a couple of hours before a rugby match that I wanted to watch. And I don't know why, I just suddenly thought there must be some data on the association. Let's start with the association between cholesterol and mortality. So let's look at heart deaths, because I'm not just interested in disease. The most important endpoint is, of course, deaths. So let's look at heart deaths. Let's look at all-cause deaths, because there's no point dying less of one thing or more of one thing and less of another. All-cause mortality is the important thing. And let's look at cholesterol, and let's look at big data. And I went on the World Health Organization website. This was back in 2010, and I found some fantastic data. So I could actually look for 192 countries in the world. I could look by men and by women, because of course cholesterol is very different by men and women, which itself is a very interesting thing to explore. And I just did some scatter diagrams. I plotted the relationship for those 192 countries between the cholesterol levels of that country for men and for women, and their deaths from heart disease and their deaths from all causes. It was genuine research. I didn't know what I was going to find. If you just stopped me beforehand and said, what do you think you'll find? I'll say, well, there's bound to be a relationship, because that's all we hear, that there's a relationship between high cholesterol and high deaths, but I don't know how strong it's going to be. I'm just interested to find out. What I did not expect to find is what I did find, which was there was actually an inverse relationship between cholesterol and deaths, for heart deaths and all deaths for men and for women. And it got stronger as you went through. So I think the weakest association from memory was men and heart deaths, then women and heart deaths, then men and all deaths, and women and all deaths. And you were getting up to strengths of correlation of around zero 0.7. And in terms of R squared, the amount of the relationship that you've actually explained between those two variables, it was over half, it was over 50%. So the higher the cholesterol in the country, the lower the death rate for men and women, heart deaths and all causes. So there is not even a positive association. And if two things aren't positively associated, it is seriously difficult to try to claim that one causes the other. And that's the basics of what I found 14 years ago.
Okay, just a question around for people that have had a previous heart attack or previous heart disease. Now, for that type of population, men or women, would higher cholesterol in any way be bad for previous heart disease or a previous heart attack?
I don't think that cholesterol causes harm in the body. When you actually understand what cholesterol is, it is one of the most vital substances in the human body. If we took all cholesterol, let's say statins, which genuinely do lower cholesterol, they try to block the pathway by which the body makes cholesterol. Let's say that they weren't just effective, they were actually 100% effective. And you took a statin and immediately the body could not in any cell make any cholesterol. You would die instantly. You would be a puddle on the floor. I mean, cholesterol is the essence of every cell. It's just the structure of every cell. You have no life. You have no cell form without cholesterol. It is that vital to the human body. And that is not up for debate. There's nobody who would be telling you to lower your cholesterol that would not agree with that. They can't. It is an absolute fact. We would die without cholesterol. We would die without oxygen, etc. We'd die without water. We would absolutely die instantly if statins completely blocked that pathway. So when you realize how important cholesterol is to the body, the idea that it is trying to do all those really important functions and harm you at the same time just makes no sense. It has never made any sense to me that the body is actually making something constantly. It's making it in you. It's making it in me right now. Is it doing that to harm us? No, I just do not believe that it is. Now, the body, because cholesterol is one of our repair lipids in the body, I think that the body will make more repair lipids when you've got more to repair. So I don't know if researchers have looked at this because it's probably not convenient to the narrative, but it'd be really interesting to look at cholesterol, say, before an operation or before an injury in the same group of people, and then to look at them after an operation or after an injury, or in a period of low stress, in a period of high stress, because the body will make more of substances that repair when it needs more repair. It could therefore be a marker of ill health. I don't believe that it's a cause, but it could be the case that you've got some heart damage going on, arterial damage, coronary calcification or something. You've got some damage internally, which is going to manifest itself in heart disease. And it could therefore be that the body is trying to increase your repair production of lipids, and therefore your cholesterol might go up. But go back to that original research that I did. That's not what I found. So I was truly open to the fact that your high cholesterol could be a marker of bad health. It could be telling us that somebody has got internal damage. There's lots of repair kit building going on, but it wouldn't necessarily be the cause of that damage. Be kind of, well, I mean, I was going to say blood glucose, but blood glucose is a marker and a cause. So blood glucose, high blood glucose is a marker that you're no longer processing carbohydrates, for example, effectively, but it is also a cause of damage. We do know that too much glucose in the bloodstream is not good. So that's not a good example. But I can't see how cholesterol damages anything. I just can't.
Well, I agree. I think that most people, when they think about cholesterol, and they'll see it on their blood work, so they'll see cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, and triglycerides and LDL are not the same as cholesterol. We're going to talk more about that. You mentioned earlier that there is a difference between cholesterol with men and women. Can you elaborate on that and the differences?
Yeah, which is what is so interesting. So, if you've got a theory, and the theory that we're told is that we call it the diet heart hypothesis, if you eat too much fat, you'll raise your cholesterol and you will get heart disease. At its simplest level, that's the kind of diet heart hypothesis. Now, we have a massive paradox. We have many paradoxes with that theory, but we have a massive one with men and women because men, on average, have lower cholesterol levels than women and higher deaths from heart disease and higher incidence of heart disease, and they develop heart disease younger than women do. So we have 50% of the population giving us this massive paradox. We've got an age paradox as well, which is actually that our cholesterol tends to fall as we get older. Is that because the body gets less good at making this repair mechanism? I don't know. But we have this age paradox that says the older we get, the lower our cholesterol is. But of course, the older we get, the more we die from heart disease. And then, of course, we have other country paradoxes. So we have France, a classic paradox where their saturated fat intake is one of the highest in Europe. Their smoking is one of the highest in Europe. Their heart disease is one of the lowest in Europe. So a couple of things that we say are related to heart disease don't show up in the data for entire countries or entire sexes or entire age groups. So there are so many black swans with this hypothesis. It doesn't even withstand basic scrutiny. And yet it is just trotted out and genuinely believed by, I don't know, 95+% of people that you and I know.
Absolutely. I hear that every single time. That's why I wanted to have this conversation about cholesterol, saturated fat, and LDL, dispelling all these myths that we hear, because I think that if people arm themselves with the information that they need, they can be the expert in their health and understand what's going on in the biology, the biochemistry of their cells. I wanted to ask you about you, Dr. Harcombe. You are an expert in this field of dietary guidelines and fat and saturated fat. How did you become interested in that?
Great question. I first became interested in obesity. So it never made any sense to me that we developed an obesity epidemic in the last quarter of the last century, and it just shows no sign of abating. I've never met anyone who wants to be overweight, let alone obese. This idea that you're, cool at being some supersize or something, I just don't buy. I don't think that's how people want to be. It impacts your mobility, it impacts your everyday life. It just isn't an enjoyable state to be in. And yet, we have 2/3 of the so-called developed world overweight or obese. So you've got this incongruence that just doesn't make sense. And I'm a mathematician by background. To me, logic is everything. If something doesn't make sense, I want to try to understand why it doesn't make sense. So I was curious about the obesity epidemic, and I wrote a book about this back in 2009. I did a lot of research for that. And to understand the epidemic, you've got to understand when it started. And it started in the US, particularly around the period 1976 to 1980. And if you look at, there's a classic N-Haynes graph that I think a lot of people will be familiar with. And it sort of trundles along and then just, it takes off like an aeroplane at about 76 to 80. And that was the start of the obesity epidemic in the US. The UK was a little bit further behind because it took us a while to move away from the more traditional UK diet, I guess, of meat and vegetables. But the UK followed soon behind. And by the end of the last century, we had 25% of men and women in the UK obese, from a starting base of a couple of percent just 25 years earlier. I mean, it was utterly insane. So to understand, for something to happen, something must happen. It's one of the forces of physics, isn't it? That if something isn't acted upon, it doesn't change. So something needed to change. And I went back to look at what changed. And of course, you ask the obvious questions that follow the narrative. Did we start eating more and doing less? Actually, no. The data actually say the opposite. If you look at declared calorie intake, certainly in the UK over the last quarter of the last century, we actually claimed that we ate fewer calories than we had done previously. And I kind of buy that because people were in much more active jobs. They might have been working in the car industry or farming, as opposed to sitting at a desk. So it makes sense. But then conversely, are we actually doing less overall? No, again, the evidence suggested that we're not. And Gary Taubes found this in his book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. Nobody was jogging when I was younger. Nobody was dressing up in lycra and cycling around the streets and going to gyms. We didn't have this explosion of gyms. I don't even think my parents knew what a gym was. We just didn't eat more and do less. That just didn't add up. One thing that did change, so I made this my hypothesis, we changed our dietary guidelines. So I became fascinated by the dietary guidelines, and they literally changed overnight. And it was led by the US. It was driven by first the Senator McGovern Committee in 1977. And then it was embedded in the US in the first dietary guidelines for Americans that were launched in 1980, and then, of course, revised every 5 years after that. So my PhD question was, should we have introduced those dietary fat guidelines? I'm going to be talking quite a bit for a couple of minutes, but I really need to share this because this was a massive penny drop for me. We only eat three things. Forget alcohol. We only eat three things that have got calories: fat, protein, and carbohydrate. It is a nutritional fact. I can give you a couple of references for this, but it is a nutritional fact that protein tends to be about 15% of any natural diet. Interestingly, veggie or not veggie, it's about 15%. Carnivores will get it up north of 20, but they won't get it up north of 30 without doing some seriously stupid things. So the two macronutrients, the interchange of fat and carbohydrate. So the minute the government set those low-fat dietary guidelines, and the total fat guideline was don't have more than 30% of your calories in the form of total fat, imagine a little pie in front of you. You've got 15% protein, you've got 30% fat. You have immediately mandated 55% carbohydrate. So the low-fat diet was necessarily announcing a high-carbohydrate diet by default. And they had never studied that. They'd never said, oh, do we know that this is healthy? They didn't even know that it was safe. And I would put it to people watching this and listening to this that after 45 years or whatever, we kind of know it isn't safe. We have explosions of diabetes, obesity, cancer, heart disease. This experiment has really not gone well. And that's why people like Nina Teicholz fight to try to get the guidelines back to something that is much more akin to what we evolved to eat. So that's basically where the background to my PhD. If you then want to go into that in any more detail, far away, but I should give you an opportunity to jump in.
I had a question about the protein, which we're going to talk about protein a little bit later, and then getting back to cholesterol and saturated fat. Why is it that if you eat more than 30% of your daily calories from protein, you're going to do disastrous things?
I don't know if you'll do disastrous things. I have looked at this. I mean, if you go on my site, zoeharcombe.com, put in the word protein, I have looked quite extensively at these papers that claim you're going to do damage to kidneys and liver or whatever. You really have to get up into that territory. And it is such an unnatural thing to do. And the reason it's an unnatural thing to do is because of another basic factoid about food that I found studying all of this. This is the kind of stuff that you should be taught in school because it's really interesting. But you kind of almost stumble across it if you're just a curious, open-minded researcher. So one of the things that I realized is that protein is in just everything other than sucrose and oils. So I have this little chart that I put up in presentations. I say, right, over on this side, you've got a pure 100% carbohydrate. There's only one of those, which is sucrose. And then over at this side, you've got pure 100% fats. And we know those as various oils. And they'll all have different amounts of saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, coconut oil, olive oil, sunflower oil, all of that kind of thing. They differ in those compositions, but they're all 100% fat. Every single thing in between of those two extremes has protein. Lettuce has protein, apples have protein. Now, plants don't have complete protein and they have inferior protein relative to animal foods, but they've all got protein, which probably is why it just tends to be a certain proportion of a natural diet. Because with all the foods that you're eating, if you're eating proper foods, you're getting protein. If you're eating foods in the right form, you're getting them in the form that nature intended, which is why I'm saying to people, if you've got some chicken, have the skin on your bit of chicken. Don't go start eating everyone else's skin, but have your food as it's supposed to come to you. and eat the food in its natural form. So to be getting your protein up to 30% of your diet, you've got to be doing stupid things. So you've got to be having skinless chicken breasts and not even the fattier parts of the chicken. So you wouldn't be having thighs or legs. You'd be doing white fish, not oily fish, and you'd be grilling it. You wouldn't be cooking it in butter or with any kind of fat. A lot of bodybuilders, of course, doing these protein shakes, which often is very high in the sort of the plant proteins and won't necessarily give you the amino acids in the right balance. And then you can be starting to get your protein up to that kind of level. And then, could you be doing kidney damage, liver damage? Yeah, almost certainly. I mean, I think Sally Fallon-Morell says you're probably depleting your vitamin A at the most effective rate that you could possibly be doing. So anything unnatural in your diet is unnatural. Just don't do it. Eat the food in the form that it comes from nature. Don't eat the stuff in 80% of the grocery store. It's just all that basic stuff that anyone talking about nutrition sensibly is saying.
Absolutely. It's the basic stuff that we need to go back to understand, to improve our health. I wanted to ask about fat because if we shouldn't be eating 50 to 55% of our diet in carbohydrates, and then we need to be eating about 15 to 20% protein, the rest comes from fat, which tends to be about 70 to 80% fat, it sounds like. Do you think that a high fat diet could actually fix the heart?
Yes, because you're getting it's less sort of what you're delivering, but what you would be eating to get that kind of diet. So, if somebody, I mean, I've heard of people doing vegan keto, and I always kind of think, well, how does that work? You must be consuming a heck of a lot of oils, olive oil and coconut oil, and because if you're going low carb, you're not even having sort of legumes and grains. You won't be having fruit because that's quite high carb. So, just kind of where are you getting your protein? Where are you getting your calories? That just doesn't seem healthy. I worry when people go and kind of try to work on their macros. My number one principle is eat real food. So when people say to me, oh, I want to get my macros to 5% carbohydrate, 80% fat and 15% protein, that's when you start doing really stupid things. That's when you start adding butter to your steak because you're deliberately trying to get your fat intake up. It's like, don't just eat food. Okay, eat food. I ran my sort of typical day or whatever through macros recently, just kind of for interest. And I don't know, I'm probably about 60% fat. What kind of carbohydrate? I think at the time I was on about 100 grams of carbohydrate, which would be probably about 20. So it's probably about 20% protein, 20% carbohydrate, 60% fat. And that wasn't setting about doing anything. That was having high fat Greek yogurt with some berries for breakfast. I don't have to stick to 20 grams of. I'm not diabetic or obese or anything, so I'm quite happy with things like fluid dairy. I love milk. I have the most massive cappuccino in the morning. It's about the size of me. Lunch might be eggs scrambled in butter. It might be some leftovers. If I'm busy, it might be more yogurt and berries or whatever. I have chocolate mousse every day, which is basically cream, eggs, very dark chocolate. Dash of vanilla, dash of rum. And then my main meal in the evening is meat or fish. And it's red meat, not white meat. And it's oily fish, not white fish. Cheese, maybe berries and cream. I mean, it might seem a bit sort of samey, but the carbs add up. It's really quite interesting. I mean, a large latte in the morning, I was really quite surprised to see, is 15 grams of carbohydrate. Even just a few berries with some Greek yogurt, fluid dairy starts adding up, as opposed to hard dairy like cheese. That starts adding up. So that's another 10 grams of carbohydrate. My chocolate mousse, I worked it out for my brother who's a type 1 diabetic, that's 7. I have a really large salad in the evening. I don't fear vegetables. We grow vegetables, so I don't avoid carrots or parsnips or turnips or even root veg or beetroot or anything like that. It really adds up if you're aware where carbohydrates can come from. So I think I was getting up to about 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate. And then just naturally, by being low carb and normal protein and not eating in a daft way, I was ending up reasonably high fat. And because I was having red meat and I might have a ribeye, which is a naturally fatty steak rather than this skinless chicken breast nonsense, you end up in the right territory for fat and protein.
Absolutely. So the higher fat lifestyle is very protective on your heart, and also the other aspects of your body. I want to circle back to cholesterol. What is the connection with eating a high fat diet? So, say, for example, s- uh, chicken thighs with the skin, ribeye, and cholesterol.
Yeah. So you said something in the intro. And I can only go back to what I said, which is I don't know how saturated fat can raise LDL cholesterol. I don't know the biochemical mechanism by which that can happen. You might have some listeners that can say, here's how I think it can happen. So, I mean, let's take as an example, the single food on the planet with the highest concentration of saturated fat is coconut oil. All foods that contain fat contain all three fats. That's another really interesting factoid. There is no food that is just saturated fat. There is no food that is just monounsaturated fat. So coconut oil is probably about 92% saturated fat, and then the remainder is monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat. But we've got a good example. So let's say that's coconut oil. I glug it down. That's going through my digestive system. Okay, so the mouth is where we'll start to metabolize, break down carbohydrates with salivary enzymes. The stomach is where we start to break down protein. My coconut oil is 100% fat. So the mouth had nothing to do. The stomach's got nothing to do. It's going to go down into my lower digestive system. And the body is going to start then extracting nutrients from the fat, which is where we break things down, sort of lower down the digestive system. There are astonishingly few nutrients in oils, which is why anyone's saying olive oil is super healthy or coconut oil is super healthy. Well, it's nonsense because it's got no minerals, because it's an oil, it's got virtually no vitamins. It's very high calorie in terms of nutrient density. So it's very poor in nutrient density, but it's going through my digestive system and it will get down into the lymphatic system where the body will want to pack it into. We're going to start getting into lipoproteins now. The body is going to want to pack it into what we call chylomicrons, which are the biggest form of lipoproteins. And that's where fats sort of get packaged in the body, and then they go off around our bloodstream, basically, to be able to deliver those fats to where the body wants them. Now, in an entirely separate universe, every cell in the body is capable of making cholesterol. Yes, the liver will make a lot of our cholesterol, and the liver also recycles cholesterol, which is an interesting point. You know, if liver were really so bad for us, if cholesterol were really so bad for us, surely at the point it gets back to the liver, the body would get rid of it. But it doesn't. It recycles it because it's such a valuable resource and it puts it back into the circulation. So where does the saturated fat get into the supply chain, as it were, for cholesterol? You know, if we look at the mevalonate pathway by which cholesterol is made, where does saturated fat come in? I just can't see it. I can't see. They're two completely separate biomechanical systems to me. I just can't see how one impacts the other. Now, where I think we've got this idea from is that there are certain oils and there are certain foods that absolutely do lower cholesterol, and that's because they contain plant sterols. So not all plant foods, but many, probably most actually, plant foods contain things called plant sterols, which is kind of the plant version of cholesterol. And we know that when we consume those things, let me think of something. Certain vegetable oils are pretty high in plant sterols, but particularly some of the polyunsaturated oils. So let's say instead of consuming that coconut oil, I consumed that as a sort of rapeseed oil. So I'm getting far more plant sterols. Now, in my digestive system, they are actually going to compete with my human cholesterol. The plant cholesterol and the human cholesterol, it's the simplest way I can put it. They're going to compete to an extent, and the plant cholesterol is going to win to an extent. So we know that plant sterols do lower cholesterol. So I think where people might have got this idea that saturated fat raises cholesterol, it's not that, it's actually the opposite. It's that when you have a diet higher in unsaturated fat, that has a potential to lower cholesterol. So imagine you put a group of people and you said, right, you stay on your normal diet, you go on one with more plant sterols, this group is going to lower its cholesterol. And so they're going to come to the conclusion, that group, they stuck with their higher saturated fat intake and it increased their cholesterol. No, it didn't. It's just that the unsaturated fat lowered their cholesterol. Now, there was a very interesting study done that was published in the BMJ. I think if you go on my site and you put in LDL, butter, olive oil, that should pull up this post. And it was a 3-way study where they gave some people olive oil, some people butter, and then left the control group somewhat alone and tried to see what happened. And the butter didn't raise the cholesterol. So it kind of, in that one experiment, they kind of showed us adding something that contains very high levels of saturated fat is actually not going to raise your cholesterol, but plant cereals are almost certainly going to lower your cholesterol. Now, I did some original research on this during my PhD. So if you Google Harcombe Baker plant sterols, a paper should come up. It's it's only 800 words. It's so readable. It was an opinion piece that we were asked to write in the Journal of Biological Sciences. And I just very briefly looked at the impact of plant sterols on cholesterol, and then the impact of plant sterols on things that actually matter, like heart disease. And you might lower your cholesterol, but you were increasing your risk of disease. So there was evidence that plant sterols are not a good idea. But if all you're obsessed with is cholesterol, then yeah, you might take plant sterols. People actually go to these health stores and say, can I take plant sterols as a supplement? And it will lower their cholesterol. But the evidence that I looked at said it's actually worse for heart disease, and it was actually worse for cancer as well. So this is not a good thing to be doing. But I think that might be where this whole myth has come from. I don't see how saturated fat, I don't see how butter can raise LDL cholesterol or coconut oil for that matter. I just don't see how.
As Dr. Harcombe mentions, saturated fat does not directly increase total cholesterol, and both are so important for overall health. But another very important aspect of overall health, apart from what you eat, is light therapy, specifically red light therapy, as that has been proven to improve your cell's mitochondria. Now, what red light therapy does is that it penetrates several millimeters into the tissue. It enhances energy production, it decreases inflammation, and it also improves blood flow. And that has so many benefits for you. Specifically, you can see benefits in improved sleep, recovery, and skin health. Now, you can do this quite naturally through natural sunlight exposure, but many of you might not have access to natural sunlight, maybe because of your work schedules or perhaps where you live. And that's why investing in a red light therapy device might be beneficial. And that's why I have BondCharge as a sponsor of today's video. BondCharge produces high quality red light therapy devices with bioactive frequencies of red and near infrared light at 660 nanometers to 850 nanometers. And I like to use this mini red light therapy device from BondCharge because it's quite compact, as I travel quite a lot. And if you're super keen on improving your health, you also need to think about blue light. I'm sure that many of you spend a decent amount of time on your smartphone or maybe watching TV. Well, these devices emit what's called blue light. And over time, blue light can suppress your melatonin production, which can affect your sleep. So you might want to invest in some blue blocking glasses that block 100% of blue and green light. I like to use these Morris blue blocking glasses from BondCharge. I just pop these on a few hours before sleep, and I find that I have a better night's sleep and I wake up feeling more refreshed. So if you'd like to try BondCharge's red light therapy devices or their blue blocking glasses, just head to bondcharge.com/primal podcast and use code primal15 to get 15% off. Okay, let's talk about a few different things. So saturated fat is an independent factor from cholesterol. So saturated fat does not directly increase cholesterol. It could be the inverse relationship that the plant sterols, which is lowering cholesterol, that might be the relationship that we see. But let's talk about cholesterol and what happens when you lower cholesterol, the impact on the body. You said that a higher fat diet will help the heart. Does lowering cholesterol affect the heart?
Yeah, I don't think I said, I said it might help the heart because it's providing a repair lipid. I think it would very much depend where that fat came from. I think if somebody was drinking rapeseed oil on a daily basis, or eating lots of foods that have got those, terrible seed oils in them, I don't think that is going to be good for the heart at all. I think it's going to be inflammatory. I think natural fat in natural foods is not going to be harmful. And I think as part of an overall healthy diet, it's going to give us everything we need, the essential fats, the complete proteins, the vitamins and minerals. So natural fat in natural food, I think is going to be good for every aspect of our health. So it's just natural food that is just such the most powerful thing in what we're eating. I actually think it's then generally going to be good for all of our health. And if we've got inflammation going on, then the body is going to try to increase the lipids to repair that inflammation or to repair that damage. In terms of lowering cholesterol then, so I really don't think lowering cholesterol with plant sterols is a good idea. I also personally do not think that lowering cholesterol with statins is a good idea. Now, there is some evidence that if you've already had a heart attack, males who've had a heart attack, there does appear to be some benefit from taking a statin. It's absolutely tiny in terms of longevity. I think there was a Christensen paper, it might be 2015 from memory, that looked at if you took a statin for 5 years, what might you buy in terms of longevity? And it's 3 to 4 days. Which most people would be really surprised at. And it's like, whoa, so I've got the side effects for the whole of those 5 years, and I might buy myself 3 to 4 days at the end of it. Not sure I'm going to do that. And the side effects are the important thing. So I wonder if, that there is general evidence that statins every drug has more than one effect. And people talk about the fact that statins almost certainly have an anti-inflammatory effect because they have been talked about as potential medicines in things like rheumatoid arthritis. So that indicates that the pharmaceutical company are aware of that inflammatory effect. So I do wonder if statins have ways of doing some helpful things in certain groups of people. And actually, I would see the cholesterol lowering impact of statins as an unwanted side effect. I mean, if statins could do some of the things that they do, but without lowering the cholesterol, they might be better. But then I think they would be called aspirin, which doesn't have the side effects of statins. It has a couple of complications, stomach bleeds very rarely, but it does seem to have the sort of anti-clotting, anti-inflammatory factors that perhaps is where statins are getting their efficacy from. Now, when you look at the side effects of statins, and they're fully available in the patient information leaflet. So I do encourage people, particularly when the doctor has said, oh, you need to go on these, go to the patient information leaflet. The most common statin is called Lipitor, made by Pfizer. I think last time I checked it had earned, I'll get this wrong, but it's something like $269 billion. One drug for one pharmaceutical company alone. It is absolutely staggering, the money that this has made. And so we have a lot of people that it's been prescribed to, and the patient leaflet will caution on things like raised blood glucose levels. If you Google statin diabetes lawsuit, you'll see that there are lawsuits as a result of the blood glucose impact of statins. But then what you'll see on the patient leaflet is also what people report if you go on any forums where people are talking about having been put on statins, and people chat very, very openly. And they talk about what I call the M's. So they talk about muscle ache, they talk about memory loss, they talk about mind cognitive decay, they talk about mojo, my get up and go has got up and gone kind of thing. I've seen extreme cases of debilitation of people being on these drugs, people completely transformed. Dwayne Graveline wrote a brilliant book, Lipitor, Thief of Memory. He was an astronaut. So astronauts are among the most brilliant people that we've got on Earth. He was put on statins by his doctor. He couldn't remember where he'd left his car in the car park. Came off statins, everything went back okay, was persuaded to go back on them, the same thing happened. So, he was pretty sure that this is what is going on. And there are many such stories. And people then are sort of scared by their doctor, oh, you better not come off them because you're going to have a heart attack kind of thing. So people are putting up with real quality of life impacting medications because their doctors don't know the Christian paper that said, and if you are one of the people who will benefit, and most won't, you might get 3 or 4 days in 5 years. Almost everyone would throw their statins away if they were given that kind of information. Or if they were told, you've got a 1 in 20, I can't remember what it was when I look at the nnt.com and then look at the evidence for statins, either with no existing heart disease or pre-existing heart disease, and look at some of those numbers. And I think it was something like 1 in 10, you're going to get muscle damage, 1 in, I don't know, I daren't say 20 or whatever, type 2 diabetes. Those are not small odds when it's really not going to buy you that much time if you're one of the people who might benefit in any way anyway.
Absolutely. It's so interesting that you talk about statins, how they reduce cholesterol, particularly LDL. It's actually the large point LDL that they try to reduce. Is that right? Not the small dense LDL.
I don't buy that either. I have a real problem with that. When I hear people talking about, so okay, here's how I think it goes. I think they say, cholesterol is harmful. It's like, well, no, it isn't, because we've got this inverse relationship between cholesterol and heart disease. Okay, so it's not cholesterol, it's, LDL. Well, LDL isn't even cholesterol, it's a lipoprotein. Okay, so it's LDL cholesterol. And that's the bad cholesterol. And then this is the good cholesterol. It's like, well, cholesterol is cholesterol is cholesterol. So why are you making this up? Okay, so if it's not LDL, it's small, dense LDL versus large, fluffy LDL. And I just want to scream at them and go, when will you just shut up and accept that your hypothesis is wrong? I just do not buy. I mean, when you're talking about an LDL, in relative terms, I think somebody put it as, if you can imagine the biggest stadium that you've got in Canada, and you can imagine not even one person sat in the corner, that's almost the size of the smallest lipoprotein to the largest or something, or the claimed small dense to the, it's just absurd. It's just absurd. I just don't buy any of that at all. We have lipoproteins. We have the set of lipoproteins, and if you want me to go through those, I'll just.
That's a question to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, we started off with chylomicrons. So why do we have this incredible system? So I've got some water here. If I got some olive oil and dropped it in the water, it wouldn't mix. The olive oil would just sit on top because it doesn't mix. So think of the body in that way. So the blood system is the same as our water. Blood is basically akin to water. And then the olive oil is kind of matching our lipids in the bloodstream. Now, we need a transportation system to get all that fat and cholesterol and all the good stuff from our sort of lymphatic system, from our digestive system, out to all the cells of the body where it's needed. So we have to have a taxi system, because we can't just have those fats in the bloodstream, because we would clog up. And we actually have no fats whatsoever openly in our bloodstream. That just would not be possible. Otherwise, you give blood and you sort of look at it and go, oh, look, there's the olive oil bit. So the body has this incredible system called the lipoprotein system. So these lipoproteins, and lipo sort of coming from fat and protein, what we know it as. I think of them as little taxis. So on the outside, they've got to be water friendly because they're going through the blood. And on the inside, they've got to be fat friendly because they're carrying fats as cargo. So we have these taxis, and the biggest taxi is the chylomicron. That's the one that's going to take out nutrients and fats out to the cells that need it. Next biggest one is the VLDL. Yeah, I'm just remembering, right? So chylomicron. Then we've got VLDL, which is very confusingly also called triglycerides. They should be consistent with this, but that's the very low density lipoprotein, also known as triglycerides. IDL, which nobody ever talks about because nobody's ever worked out how to lower it, so it's of no benefit to anyone. That's your intermediate density lipoprotein. Then you have LDL, which is a lipoprotein. It's a taxi. So when people start talking to you about your LDL and they don't mention cholesterol, you should stop them straight away and say, okay, are you still talking about cholesterol, or are you now talking about taxis? Because it's really important that you get your language right here. And doctors then would go, oh, what do you mean? And get all really confused. But you shouldn't let people get away with jumping between LDL and LDL cholesterol, because one is the taxi and another is something in the taxi. Now, in these taxis, VLDL, IDL, LDL, and then for the completeness, we've got the smallest one, which is HDL, high density lipoprotein. And they talk about LDL as being bad cholesterol. It's not even cholesterol, it's a taxi. HDL, they say is good cholesterol. It's not even cholesterol, it's a taxi. So then they say, oh, I mean the cholesterol in the LDL and then the cholesterol in the HDL. Well, first of all, in those taxis, you don't just have cholesterol. You've got four major things. You've got triglycerides, cholesterol, phospholipids, and proteins, basically, in that package. So you've got some cholesterol in the LDL and you've got some cholesterol in the HDL. But cholesterol is cholesterol. So the chemical formula for cholesterol is C27H46O. So again, if your doctor says to you, oh, your good cholesterol is this and your bad cholesterol is that, I'd just be so tempted to say, please, can you tell me the chemical formula for good cholesterol? And then tell me the chemical formula for bad cholesterol. Make them realize the insanity of what they're saying to you. Because we have to stop this nonsense. This whole narrative has sprung up around this amazing industry of lowering our cholesterol. And doctors get taught it in medical school. They don't think to question it. They need a patient to be saying to them, seriously, doc, how can you be telling me there's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol? It's like saying, there's good H2O and bad H2O. H2O is H2O. There might be dirt in the water, but that's not H2O. There's something else alongside the H2O. Cholesterol is cholesterol. So those are our lipoproteins. So LDL is actually a residue of IDL. And then people will say, well, then surely and I think IDL is a residue of VLDL. So people will say, well, if you increase your VLDL, then you might end up with more LDL. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick has made his life's work looking at what really causes heart disease and cholesterol and statins. And he said, well, you would think that, but it's actually very interesting. There's actually no direct relationship between LDL and VLDL. So it isn't the case that the more VLDL you have, the more LDL you have. The body seems to regulate the amount of LDL it wants in quite a different way. So the LDL is the little taxi that's basically going off to the cells to deposit its cargo, the phospholipids and proteins and triglycerides and cholesterol. And on each cell, they have what we call an LDL receptor. So if the cell is a bit damaged and it needs some of that cargo that's traveling around the bloodstream, the little taxi comes along and the cell will just grab it and take it into the cell, take what it needs, and then chuck it back out of the cell. And then the HDL taxi will pick up any remnants that are coming back, take them back to the liver, they get recycled, and then that's the process going on. So the idea that the stuff going out to your cells to do their vital work is somehow bad, and the stuff coming back from the cells, having done their vital work, is good, again, it's just like, there's no logic. Why? Why would that be? Why is the body making something just to kill you? Why would it do that? We'd have died out long ago if there was anything in real food or any serious malfunction in the body. If there's any serious thing that had gone wrong in the design, we'd have died out long ago.
Can I ask about the LDL pertaining to small dense LDL? What does that mean? And why did that concept originate?
I honestly think that it's just trying to keep the hypothesis going.
Is there such a thing as small dense LDL?
I don't think so. I mean, this is the beauty of you doing podcasts like this. You'll have somebody else swearing blind by small dense LDL, and you've got me saying, I don't buy it. And then it's for your listener to say which one made more sense to them. Now, if you look on, again, it's on a chart on my site, but if you actually look at, I think they're measured in nano molecules or something, go and have a look at. If you Google lipoproteins, content, size, structure, and all the rest of it, go and have a look at it, and then have a look at what the size of LDL and the range that it falls into, and then ask yourself, do I buy that within that range there are large fluffy taxis and there are small dense taxis? A is your first question. And then B, your second question would be, and what difference would it make anyway? Now, where they try to go with this is that small dense are bad because they can get through the endothelial wall. And large fluffy is good because it can't get through the endothelial wall. And Malcolm Kendrick will say that is complete and utter BOLLOX. The endothelial wall does not, in its natural undamaged state, the endothelial wall is not going to let anything through. It cannot do that. It would be too catastrophic to our health and well-being, our survival indeed. You would not have LDL receptors on cells if the L could go, oh no, don't worry, Mr. Receptor, I'm just going to whack right through the endothelial wall here. No need for a receptor. I mean, it's insane to me. Now, what does happen, and this is what Malcolm thinks heart disease is all about, and I long thought the same thing. There are a number of things that damage the endothelial wall, and probably over 200. And certain conditions damage them. So we know that certain conditions make people more or less prone to heart disease, being male, getting older, and all the rest of it. But then there are a number of things that damage our endothelial wall, almost certainly sugar, almost certainly smoking, pollution, chemicals, probably vegetable oils. Many, many things have got that capacity to damage stress, damage our endothelial wall. And then think about it. If you cut somewhere on your hand and you get a scab form, at some point it's just going to fall off. And go away. So if you've got damage on your arterial wall, if we think of that as sort of the arterial wall, and you've got some damage getting here, you can't let a scab will form. The body will put a sort of plaque over that damage, and then will try to give it the chance to heal. You cannot let that plaque break away, because it could then just float out into the bloodstream and cause a blockage in a narrower vessel as it travels through the body. And then you've got big damage. So the body will put a sort of plaque over that damaged bit. And of course, it will then send the repair kit to that damaged area. There's the irony. What is the repair kit? It's the LDL. So cholesterol will actually go to the scene of the damage. And this was where the very first idea came that cholesterol was a problem, came from some Russian pathologists at the beginning of the last century, where they opened up men who had died suddenly, which we now know to have been heart disease, and they noticed that their arteries were blocked up because there was some damage, and then some damage on top of the damage, and then more damage, and then suddenly you've closed that whole sort of blood vessel. They found cholesterol and other lipids at the scene of the damage because they had gone there to repair the damage. Somebody's used the analogy, it's like blaming the firefighters for setting the fire. They're there to repair the fire. They didn't set the fire, but you are going to see them at the area of damage, but don't assume that they caused the damage. And of course, if people carry on doing the behavior that caused that damage to the arterial wall in the first place, the smoking, the pollution, the stress, bad diet, a lack of exercise, sedentary behavior, not exercising, the circulatory system, and so on, you will get that sort of widowmaker where it all gets blocked. Now, would small, dense LDL, if they even existed, be more of an issue in that circumstance because you've got the arterial wall potentially compromised? Are they more able to get through? Still doesn't make sense to me, because you've built that plaque over the whole area of damage. And what the heck difference would it make anyway? If they are trying to get there, then they've got cargo that area of the body would actually welcome right now, because it's got damage. It's got damage that needs repairing. So I just find the whole small, dense, large, fluffy completely illogical, completely implausible. And I can't hear it when I hear people saying it in presentations, like, no, up until then, you were with me, but no, you just lost me. I can't do it. I'm sorry.
So pertaining to LDL, another thing that we hear about is apolipoprotein B as a measure of inflammation. What are your thoughts about that?
I've never looked into that, to be honest. And I get some people writing to me saying, oh, what about this? What about that? To me, eat right, live right. Your body is going to do the right thing. It just is. And I'm just not convinced that there's all this sort of kind of markers. There might be a marker of something going wrong, but then the something going wrong is something else. So it might be that if you're not eating well, you're not exercising, you're smoking, you're drinking too much or whatever, a marker like APO would go up. I know it's one that Peter Attia sort of swears by or whatever, but then he's also a person who thinks cholesterol is a problem and we should take statins. So, dear people, you are going to get different views in this arena. I suggest you might want to look at conflicts, anyone who might be owning anything, or if you're in the medical profession, it's very difficult for you to come out and talk against cholesterol, statins, and the whole narrative, because you'll get in trouble doing so. If you're an academic, you won't get any funding. If you're a doctor, you might get some taps on the shoulder saying, hey, this is not how we talk to our patients. I've got no such conflicts. I can say how I find, and I have never found cholesterol to be a problem.
Let's talk about ranges of cholesterol, because again, that's something that people are going to look at their blood work. And then there's cholesterol, LDL, HDL, all the different, different blood markers. And there's a number against it. And then they have a range, and people just freak out. Can you talk more about, is there optimal numbers for those ranges?
Yeah, they freak out because the doctors tell them to freak out. It's one of these things. If this had never been set upon, if the Russian pathologists had never did what they did, if Ansel Keys had never picked this up in the 1950s and started suspecting, is it cholesterol? He actually came to the conclusion it wasn't, quite interestingly, and that's when he started looking at fat. So if none of that had ever happened and people didn't go to the doctor and they didn't know what their markers were, they wouldn't freak out. So some interesting things about the equation, basically, and I've just scribbled it down to remember it. So total cholesterol is measured as the sum of LDL cholesterol, so the cholesterol in the LDL taxi, plus HDL cholesterol, the cholesterol in the HDL taxi, plus, and then they use something called a Friedewald equation, which then takes your VLDL divided by 5. Why? I have no idea. But that's basically what they take as the equation. Now, in the standard blood test, particularly in the UK, I don't know what it's like over in North America, there's only two things that they can measure. They can measure total cholesterol and they can measure HDL. Now, I did maths when I was at A-level in university. You've got an equation there with 4 unknowns, and you can only measure 2 of them. That is an insoluble equation. You are, by definition, estimating the other variables. So they don't even know LDL. In most of the tests, unless you have that sort of high spectrum thing that they talk about, where they do start trying to say, oh, look at your small dents and look at your large fluffy and making up all this kind of nonsense. That's a pretty sophisticated cholesterol test. Certainly in the UK, that does not happen. So the LDL is guessed because you can only measure 2 of those things. So first of all, this is so not an exact science. You could go for a cholesterol test one day, you could go for a cholesterol test the next day, and you would get a different reading. So I've got a great paper if anyone needs it for their own PhD or something, where a couple of Scottish people, and I think this goes back to about 89, Fraser is ringing a bell as one of them, did some measurements on this and found that your typical cholesterol test would be out by 20%. So if you want to, okay, it could be 20% higher than you've just been told, but it could be 20% lower than you've just been told. That and the fact that they're guessing the thing that seems to be most important should start raising some red flags to you. Then you've got the thing that a lot of people don't take into account, which is at what time of year did you have your cholesterol test? Because one of the many life vital functions of cholesterol is it's the process by which we make vitamin D. So you have cholesterol, you've got it in every cell. You've got cholesterol on your skin membranes. When the sun shines on those skin membranes, that's how the body synthesizes cholesterol into vitamin D. So if you are out in the sun a lot, which we know to be healthy, they tell us not to do that and to cover up and to put sun cream on or whatever. That's another thing that they tell us that is not good for us. Go out in the sun, which we know to be healthy. Our cholesterol will naturally lower because our body is making vitamin D. Now, where's the good thing there? Is it that our cholesterol lowered, or is it the fact that our vitamin D has gone up? Vitamin D, everything I've looked at with vitamin D, it's one of the most magic. Is it a nutrient? Is it a hormone? Who knows? Who cares? It's one of the most magical things I think we need for the human body. For many different things, cancer, heart disease, general well-being, warding off colds and flu and all the rest of it. So if we don't have sunshine, our cholesterol will naturally be higher and we'll get judged by our doctor as your high cholesterol is bad. Now, is it that our high cholesterol is bad, or is it that our high cholesterol is telling us that our vitamin D might be low and that might be bad? And is it the low vitamin D that might cause heart disease? And there then might be an association, notwithstanding what I found with all the data in 192 countries, but might it be that there's some association there in one particular individual between high cholesterol and heart disease, but actually the factor is low vitamin D. So another thing, if you're worried about your cholesterol, check what time of year you have it. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, don't have a cholesterol test in March. We're now on, September the 5th. I'm looking outside. It is like the middle of winter. We have a yellow rain warning. We're expecting, 10 centimeters of rain in a 24-hour period. There is no way I'm going to be getting any sun. We might not see the sun now at any level that could take cholesterol and turn it into vitamin D. We might not have any of that until April next year. That's 8 months of not making our own vitamin D, which is why it's one of the supplements that I do think people should take But that's another interesting factor about cholesterol. So I would never get mine measured. And then you're not in the system where they're pressuring you. Now, I know some people with health insurance, particularly in the US, it's a consideration of your insurance that you've got to have these regular checkups. And if they don't like the number, then they can start beating you up and putting your premiums up unless you'll take a statin and all that kind of thing. So pick the time of year that you have the test. Make sure you get some sun before you have that test. If you want to buck the test because you need to do it for insurance purposes, then take plant sterols or increase your intake of things that are very rich in plant sterols like olive oil or porridge oats or something like that. It's not going to be best for your health, but it will give you the result that will make your doctor happy, which is somewhat ironic.
What about triglycerides? Is that a marker of inflammation?
I think trigs are telling us something. So I think if anyone was to get one test, I would say do your triglycerides. And interestingly, and this goes back to, I think it's an Elizabeth Parks paper, and again, that might be about 97. There's a great paper. Hopefully I'll give you enough words here that you can Google it. And it was something like the paradox of hypertriglycerides or hypertriglyceridemia or something she was saying, that it seemed to be associated with carbohydrates. Now back, sort of 20, almost 30 years ago, that might have been a bit of a paradox. We've been telling people to avoid fat and necessarily they've been consuming more carbohydrate. And now we're finding that carbohydrates seem to be raising triglycerides and we're a little bit puzzled about this. Now, that wouldn't puzzle us, you and I, and it wouldn't puzzle people listening to this podcast because for quite some time we've become aware that carbohydrates are not the great things that they're cut out to be. Many carbohydrates that we're told to eat, I really do think are best avoided. And we certainly have no need for carbohydrates. So there's no need to eat any carbohydrate whatsoever. But if kind of you're not obese, you're not type 2 diabetic, you enjoy some things that happen to contain carbohydrate like fluid dairy, natural yogurt, berries, some vegetable salads, crunchy stuff, etc., then there should be no reason why you don't consume that carbohydrate. But no human being is going to benefit from consuming the level of carbohydrate that our dear governments tell us to consume, which is in excess of 55%, often nearer 65, 70% of our diet. And I don't think any human being can cope with that. And that will raise triglycerides.
Okay, so if triglycerides are not good and that is a marker of inflammation, what's a number that we can test?
I have no idea. I honestly have no idea. I don't get it measured. I don't care. I think the less that we measure, the better, because you're just then in the system. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I could tell you that your doctor wouldn't be happy in the UK if you had a total cholesterol level of 5 mmol per litre, and naturally our cholesterol levels used to be around 7 to 8. So we've massively lowered them across the population. So suddenly what was the norm is no longer the norm. They've declared that the norm is high and they want very low to actually be the new norm. And then what do they say? I think they do like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it might be that they then want triglycerides below 4, LDL below 3, HDL above 2 or something. I honestly, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I mean, how scientific is that going to be? Not at all.
I think that if people understand the bigger picture, which is what we spoke about cholesterol, LDL, and then we spoke about the lipoproteins and triglycerides. So cholesterol is a steroid hormone that's needed for all functions of the body, including cell membranes. Cholesterol is in lipoproteins, which are like this, for example, to simplify it. And then they are differing maybe in size and they have different levels of cholesterol, phospholipids, protein, and triglycerides. Triglycerides are in there, which is fat in the blood coming from carbohydrates and sugar. So theoretically, if you kind of avoid the processed foods, lessen the processed carbohydrates and sugars, your marker should be the way biologically that your body wants it to be. Is that a fair assessment?
Brilliant. Bang on.
Oh, good. I got that right. Well done. Let me ask you a question about fat, because when we talk about a high fat diet, people think, okay, let me just add lots of butter, a stick of butter. Why is that maybe not a good idea?
Okay, so I mean, that's a problem for a number of reasons. One is that a lot of people have come in to the keto diet because they've got type 2 diabetes, even type 1 diabetes, or obesity. And the idea that if you've got a weight problem of any kind and you're adding butter to your food really upsets me. And I think some people in the keto world have not done the best by punters in the keto world who are looking to these experts, these presenters at conferences or whatever for their good advice. It is not good advice. If you're trying to lose weight, you want to be burning body fat. You do not want to be burning dietary fat. And then people will go and test their ketones and say, oh, look, I'm in ketosis. It's like, yeah, so you're burning fat. Which fat are you burning? If you're not losing weight, you're not burning body fat. You're burning your butter fat. You know, in what circumstances would you want to be adding butter to your food if you're trying to burn body fat? Now, where I see butter can be added to food is if you've got somebody following a ketogenic diet because of diabetes. I'm thinking of two people particularly who I know here and I've sat next to at conferences and I've watched how they eat. So I'm thinking Professor Stephen Phinney and I'm thinking Professor Tim Noakes. Now, both of them, through having done very active, having had very active lifestyles, and we're talking sort of marathon running kind of lifestyles, they were carb fueling that exercise. So they got to the point that they developed type 2 diabetes. And they look back, and I particularly Professor Tim Noakes, and it's kind of like, this was inevitable. The amount that I was putting carbohydrates into my body, it was only a matter of time before the body said, enough is enough. I can't cope with this anymore. I'm insulin resistant. I can't get the carbohydrate out of the bloodstream anymore. You've now got a high HbA1c level, which is your way of realizing what I'm trying to tell you, which is I just can't do this anymore. But they're still pretty active. Even in their 60s or whatever. I think Tim Noakes might even have passed 70s now. They're still pretty active, so they need to fuel that exercise, but they're no longer able to fuel it through carbohydrate because it will damage their limbs and their eyesight and so on. In those circumstances, when you are lean, when you need fuel for your activity, you will need to add fat to your food. If you're not all the time having super high fat foods themselves. So Tim would naturally choose something like belly pork or lamb, which is a much fattier meat. But let's say he's somewhere where they serve a steak and it's not necessarily a really fatty ribeye. He'll kind of look at what's on the plate and it's like, okay, I need to put some butter on that because I'm going to need to get some more fat for fuel because I'm going to do a 10K run tomorrow or something. That's the circumstance in which it's okay to be adding fat to food. It's not okay to be adding fat to food if you need to lose weight. Now, if you find you're getting hungry on your keto diet and that's getting in the way of you sticking to it, then I would still say eat better rather than adding fat to your food. So for me, there's just no circumstance that somebody trying to lose weight or somebody who needs to lose weight should be adding butter or fat to their food. You've got to eat food and you've got to do the right thing and you've got to start burning your body fat if you want to get to the size that you optimally can achieve.
I do want to put that into context. So you were talking about overall health and also losing weight and weight loss and maintaining an optimal body weight. I did an interview with Dr. Annette Bosworth, who is very interested in therapeutic ketosis. Just want to clarify one point because she does recommend for sometimes to people to have a butter-only day. And that's only if you're doing a therapeutic ketosis, trying to get into therapeutic ketosis for cancer. So in that way, she wants, I'm just thinking of people listening, they might say, well, Dr. Boss said this. Why is Zoe saying something different? It's not something different because on the other days, Dr. Boss does say eat whole foods, which tend to be animal proteins, animal fats, the fattiest cuts of meats. It's exactly what you are saying. It's no different. She just tries to add sometimes, very rarely, a butter-only day to increase the ketones. And thereby, the preceding days, they have elevated ketones and they tend to lower the insulin and drop some body fat. So just to make that clarification.
Yeah, sorry, no, cancer is really important. And a lot of people, I hadn't heard of a butter-only day. I have heard a lot of using fasting for cancer to get the body into a different physiological state very, very quickly. So a lot of people who are looking at sort of supporting an immediate cancer diagnosis would just say, sort of go into fasting immediately. which is okay if you're going into a cancer diagnosis with some excess weight, but it's not okay if you're going in pretty lean. So my nightmare would be getting a cancer diagnosis and I'm, I don't know, 100 and not very many pounds already. And suddenly thinking I've got to fast for a few days to get my body into the right state. I then probably would be reaching for butter or coconut oil or something as soon as possible to not be putting carbohydrate in. I mean, butter's interesting because butter has got some protein. It's not a pure fat. And protein doesn't have an impact on blood glucose, but it does have an impact on insulin. So butter's interesting to me. I would say fasting, or if you want to go that route because you don't want to lose weight, then maybe coconut oil or something. But this is why it's good for your people to hear different people, and then it's up to them. They've got to work out what they would take away from what we all say.
Well, I hear a lot of different people in different contexts of depending on where that person is coming from and the population they're trying to treat. They'll say largely similar things, but people might take these nuances a bit different and then do something and say something in a different way. But largely the broader scheme of what we're talking about is largely the same thing. I want to move on to the last topic, which is fiber. Because that is another topic that you're very, very funny. What are your thoughts about fiber?
Well, there's a really short answer to that one, which is because carbohydrate is completely non-essential. We have no requirement to consume carbohydrate whatsoever. There's a great quote. Again, if you need a reference for that, I think it's the panel on macronutrients 2005, page 267 or something. Provided enough fat and protein is eaten, there appears to be no requirement for carbohydrate in the body whatsoever, which is true. Any glucose that we need for any functions in the body that the body can make through a process called gluconeogenesis, which is quite handy really because we had an ice age for several thousand years. So if we were not able to live without carbohydrate coming from plants, we would have died out. We would have been in big trouble. So start from the premise that you need no carbohydrate. Fiber is then a subset of carbohydrate. So in really simple language, if you look at what carbohydrate is, a quick carbohydrate 101, you've got what we call monosaccharides, one sugar. And straight away, every time you think carbohydrate, think sugar, because that's what these are. So you've got monosaccharides, which are glucose, fructose, and galactose. You've got disaccharides, two sugars. Let's take one as an example. So sucrose is a disaccharide, a two sugar. It's one molecule of fructose and it's one molecule of glucose. So that's one of your disaccharides. You then move into polysaccharides, which are many sugars. You know, I mean, carbohydrates are just great, aren't they? They're one sugar, two sugars, many sugars, but they are sugars. We have many sugars of the digestible kind, which would be starch in plants. It would be glycogen in humans. And then we have many sugars of the indigestible kind, and that is what fiber is. So technically, within the carbohydrate 101, fiber is many sugars that we can't digest. Now, immediately you should be thinking, how is that a good idea? It's just lots of sugar that I can't digest. And then they give you all this nonsense about, oh, but the gut flora loves it when it's sort of going through. So as you're unable to digest it and your stomach is trying to process this thing that it can't digest, somehow it's really good for your stomach on the way down. Let me think how that might work. So I just don't buy it. We have zero need for it. So that there is absolutely no argument that there's a requirement for it. There isn't. So you then get into the debate of, is it good for us? And intuitively it's not, because it's many indigestible sugars. The only thing that they seem to be able to say is that somehow it's good for gut flora, but there are so many other things that are better for gut flora. I do wonder if they've actually worked out that because they know that we don't need carbohydrate, and yet they're telling us to have 65% of our diet in the form of carbohydrate, they've got to have some USP for carbohydrate. They've got to have some sort of unique selling proposition, some benefit to it. So they have this sort of whole fiber thing that has grown up, and you need carbohydrate because you need fiber. Well, you don't need carbohydrate, so you don't need fiber. Oh, but it's really good for your gut flora. It's like, well, no, not really. Don't take antibiotics. Don't do things that are going to trash your gut, like having loads of bad foods and processed foods, and don't be a couch potato, and have natural fermented foods, and have blue cheese, and have live yogurt with lactobacillus, and drink kefir, and all the rest of it. But I mean, even carnivores who are not doing all of those foodie things, they don't seem to have bad gut flora. I mean, the ones that have actually subjected themselves to see, how am I doing? They seem to be doing just fine. So I think it's much more that there's some really bad foods that feed bad gut flora, that can then dominate over the good gut flora. I think that's probably far more likely. Just don't do that, and then you don't have to worry about all of this fiber thing. But, then of course they sell us all these products with fiber in it. So, oh, look at this cereal, super high fiber. Look at this cereal bar, super high fiber. Look at lentils, look at pulses or whatever. I mean, it's just waste. The body can't process it. So the more fiber you eat, the more waste you've got to get rid of next time you go to the toilet. In every other sphere, waste is not good. How come waste is really good somehow because it's called fiber? That's just another one I'm not buying, sorry.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. I also wanted to ask you about supplements, because if people are eating a whole food diet based on animals and animal-based foods, fat naturally found in the meat, is there anything that we're missing from our diet?
I've come to think of vitamin D as just something magical. I mean, I wouldn't use that word very often at all. It's the one thing that I've added to what I do. I eat well, I get good sleep, I manage stress, I do non-extreme, I don't run marathons, I walk, I swim, I garden. I like to think I do really quite a few things that are quite healthy. And a few years ago, when COVID was first sort of announced, I was looking around and some early things on vitamin D were looking quite interesting. I'd had a test just out of curiosity. My vitamin D levels weren't bad by any means. But I just thought, you know what? I mean, there's no harm to this. I'm just going to start going megadose. So I went for about 2,000 IU. My husband goes for about 5,000 IU. Family member who's got cancer has been on 10,000 IU. For all the time that they've had the cancer diagnosis, and they're still doing really well. So we're talking D3 here, the form that the body wants. And D3 should be taken with K2 because you want to make sure that you're not sort of causing calcification. You're actually then getting, it's a bone nutrient. It works with the bone nutrients, vitamin D. So you've got phosphorus and calcium or whatever. So you want them working all well together. So I could have stopped at D3 and K2. I added zinc. I probably get enough because I eat seafood and red meat, but I just thought, you know what, I'm going mega immune nutrients. I'm going D3, K2, zinc, and vitamin C. And vitamin C, here's a little tip for some of your listeners. If you're ever constipated, vitamin C is your friend because the body will excrete vitamin C when it's had enough. The body will wee out B vitamins when it's had enough. So if you take a B vitamin supplement, you'll find that your pee goes yellow and you just put in your dollars down the toilet. You didn't need that much. It's just being lost. Your body will make your stools quite loose and make you go to the toilet quite effectively if you have too much vitamin C. So we talk sometimes about finding your, it's going to sound a bit rude, but it's quite memorable, finding your poo tolerance level. So what can you tolerate before you'll run into the toilet? And then your body will be able to tolerate a certain amount. So then you'll be able to increase it. So, I know people who can take a few grams a day and the body is now handling it quite nicely because it's kind of, it's got used to processing it. So you can find your tolerance level of vitamin C. And those for me were the immune nutrients. Now, that's the only change I made about 4.5 years ago. And touch wood, I have not had COVID. I've not had, not that that would bother me. I've not had flu. I've not had a cold. I've not had a snivel. I've not had nothing, nor has my husband, nor has my brother, who I suggested he might want to go this route as well. He's got a couple of girls, go to school, they pick everything up and get all the colds and flu. He hasn't had one. Mentioned it to our friends in the village. They did it. Their 4 children took an appropriate dose for their ages. We see them super regularly and they're like, do you know what? We haven't had anything since you suggested that. So we're just keeping it up. I don't think it's coincidence. I think, I then went back and was able to look at the evidence for COVID and vitamin D, and they started doing some trials. So there was a particularly good Spanish trial in a hospital where, poor people who got in the wrong arm of the trial, but it was proper research. So they got people who arrived at hospital not in a good way with COVID, And they said, right, you guys, mega dose vitamin D. I think they actually put them on a vitamin D drip. You guys, we're just going to process you normally. They only did it with a few tens of people because it very quickly became unethical not to treat everyone. So the guys who had the mega dose vitamin D, none died, and very, very few went from admission to ICU. And among the people who didn't get the vitamin D, it was massively different numbers who first of all progressed to ICU and then actually unfortunately died. So, and yet all of this was suppressed. I mean, the UK National Institute for Clinical Guidelines had a look at this. I've got a post on my site. If you put in COVID and vitamin D, I mean, it was just astonishing. You know, I went through all the trial evidence. It's like that found something, that found something, that found something. And then I looked at this report that the UK government came out with, and it was like, no, nothing to see here. Like, why would you do this? Why would you do this? Why would you not have something like this hit and say, do you know what? This is going to do no harm. Every single person in the UK right now, your government is recommending that you take at least 50 mcg, 2000 IU, or half of that, you know, just any decent amount. You take that right now. But like, nah, all the advice was stay at home, don't go near hospital because we don't want to overwhelm the health service. And only at the point that you actually think you're dying, maybe then contact us. And hey, guess what? People who then turned up at hospital didn't have a very good outcome because so much could have been done before then. I mean, it's just shocking. It's really shocking.
Just going back to the dosing, if someone's watching this and they're just thinking, oh, should I take vitamin C? I probably don't get much sunshine. Is 2000 IU appropriate for most people?
I think it's I mean, it's very much size related, which again, I think that's important. So if you take an animal to the vet, they weigh the animal and then they give the dose according to the animal. So we go for a COVID shot or we go for a statin, one size fits all. You know, they might start you on one dose and they might increase it if it's a statin or something, but it doesn't matter whether you're, you know, me at 100 pounds or a male at 200 pounds or something. Most drugs, they give people the same sort of dose at the same time. So that doesn't make sense to me. So I think you'll get symptoms of kind of, if you think about it, if you stayed out in the sun too much and you get a little bit of sun overdose, sun sickness or whatever, you can feel a bit nauseous, you can feel a bit sort of lightheaded, you can feel a bit kind of, oh God, I've just overdone it, I just need to lie down a bit. If I go much higher than 2000 IU, I feel that. And I've mentioned it to people who are big on vitamin D supplements and they poo-poo it because they don't want to hear anything bad about vitamin D. Oh, you know, that must have just been a coincidence. It's like, no, you know, if I take my husband's tablet by mistake and not mine, certainly for a couple of days in a row, I get that kind of, oh no, I've taken the wrong tablet. So I think your body is going to tell you when you've had too much, and there's no point putting in too much because you're just going to spend more money on it. So someone my size, it's 2000 working for me. My husband is a former rugby player. You saw him at the top of the hour when he was sorting out the tech. You know, he's built like a brick house. You know, he's very happy on 5,000. My brother very happy on 10,000 for sort of other health things that he's got going on. But take it, people, and take it with with K2. But I just can't see why you wouldn't take it. Why would you not?
Well, I take it. So I was just asking that for myself, really, to know that am I taking the right dose? Last question for you. Was there anything in this conversation that we missed that is important to the work and the message that you provide?
No, that's a really good question, actually. I ask a similar one. I do podcasts, and my last question is quite often, you know, is there anything that you haven't had the chance to say that you would like the chance to say? I mean, I think we've done a really good sort of run through of fat, cholesterol, lipoproteins. Hopefully, you know, pitched it at, slightly simplified or whatever, but not inaccurate. You know, there's that great mention quote, isn't there, or something? You know, everything should be simplified to the point that it's understandable, but no more so. You don't want to actually lose the accuracy. So I think I hope we've got that balance right. And then, you know, just eat real food, do the other good things, but it's not just diet. You know, it is sleep, it is stress, it's less exercise, and it's more just don't be sedentary. I think that's what the body really doesn't want you to be. Move naturally, keep the ability to move naturally, be the right weight for you. And as you get older, that's going to be heavier than perhaps you would like, because you need something to fall back on if you get something serious when you're 70 or 80. So yeah, do the right things and the markers will be what they will be. Don't go looking at the markers and then start working from the other way around, which is what doctors get us to do, which is a shame.
Absolutely. I'm going to leave all the links for your book, Zoe, and also the links relating to any references and articles that you mentioned in this episode at the Primal Labs, which will be linked in the description of this episode so people can go browse, have a look at all the wonderful things that Zoe was talking about. Zoe, thank you so much for this comprehensive conversation. I'm sure many people are going to get a lot out of it and clarify this myth about cholesterol, LDL, and saturated fat, fiber, and vitamin D. If people want to find you more, where can they find you?
On my website, which is my name's at the bottom there, zoeharcombe.com. What I do, my business model is I basically dissect an academic paper each week. So, the big one recently was red meat causes type 2 diabetes. Oh, no, it doesn't. But to save you going through a, 17-page Lancet paper and 57-page supplemental or whatever it is, that's what I do. So I issue a Monday note. My 700th Monday note is going out next week. I know, that's quite impressive, isn't it? Gary Towers is always sort of saying, I struggle to write one article and then you write 700. Yeah, it kind of shocks me sometimes. So yeah, there is stuff behind a paywall, but there's free stuff as well. I think the diabetes one is on open review because it just attracted so much interest. And then on Twitter, I'm at Zoe Harcombe. That's the only one I tend to do. I can't be doing Facebook, Instagram, posting photos of my meals and all the rest of it. That's not me. So that's where you'll find me. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you so much for being here and being amazing. And I'm sure we're going to see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode with Dr. Zoe Harcombe. You can find the full show notes, including books, references, and journal articles at the Primal Labs. There is a link in the description in this episode. If you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please hit the subscribe button. That is an excellent zero-cost way to support this free health podcast. If you have a question for me or a recommendation of a guest speaker, please leave that in the YouTube comments, as I check every single one. You can also find me on other social media accounts. I'm at the Primal Podcast on Instagram and on X, formerly known as Twitter, as I generally share different information to what you'll see here on YouTube. I share different health tips and advice that I hear from the best experts. And finally, if you love this episode, you'll also enjoy another episode I did with Dr. Philip Ovadia. Dr. Philip Ovadia is a cardiac heart surgeon for the last 30 years, and he'll talk about the truth about heart attacks and heart disease and why saturated fat is not the demon. He'll also talk about the 5 metabolic markers that every single person needs to know, and something which is very controversial, which is fruit, and why an apple a day, especially if you're insulin resistant, is not good for your health or good for your heart health. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.